All right, good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. Today we have a virtual presentation by Katherine Cutshall. She is the manager at the Buncombe County Special Collections Library in Asheville, North Carolina, where she stewards a wide range of historical materials documenting the people and places of Western North Carolina. With a background in public history and a deep commitment to community engagement, Catherine works to ensure that the region's archival records reflect diverse voices and lived experiences, particularly those often excluded from traditional narratives. She has been a member of the State Historical Records Advisory Board since 2019. All right, take it away, Catherine.
All right. Thanks, Rachel. I'm going to share my screen. And thanks, y'all, for coming today. I hope that you get something out of this. I'm going to talk about a whole lot of different strategies that we use to reach various different groups of folks um, who may use our archive. And I'm trying to get you all in a spot where I can see you, but that's okay. Zoom is Zoom, Zooming this morning. Um, So we'll go ahead and get started. All my contact information is right here, and then I'll have it again on the last slide if you have any questions that we don't get to at the end of the presentation today. So we're going to talk about three different types of target audiences today. One is our patrons, users, guests, researchers, whatever you'd like to call them. Next are our administrators, so the folks who make big budget decisions, who write our job descriptions, who give us various assignments throughout the year, and community partners, so organizations that are active in our communities and may have some similarities in what we do or opportunities to collaborate. So first, we'll get started with patrons. Um, Patrons we can reach through public programs, social media, and blogs and legacy media. So one of the biggest things that we do at Buncombe County Special Collections is public programming. We're a part of a public library, but one of the things that we've changed over the last few years is kind of the diversity of our programming. A lot of times with archival institutions, we do the kind of lecture slides, 45-minute talk, 15-minute Q&A at the end. And I think those are really great, and we still do those. But we try to go beyond that as often as we can and get creative with what the connections between our institution and that particular kind of programming is. So in the past few years, we've done dance classes, which seems like a really odd thing for an archive to do, but I've got a good friend who teaches flat-foot clogging, and we tie that directly to the history of music and dance in Western North Carolina. And alongside of these, we're providing like reader's advisory along with it. So it's not we're just having a flat foot class and it happens to be hosted by Buncombe County Special Collections. We're also telling people why we're hosting that particular type of program. And we'll often provide like a little half sheet or a rack card that talks about some resources that we have in our library that apply. So in this case, it's, biographies of Bascom Lamar Lunsford, photographs and oral histories that relate to the Mountain Dance and Folk Festival and different resources like that. We've also done crafting, so we're a big fan of making corn shuck dolls, and that really helps with intergenerational types of programming because all sorts of different folks like to come to those sessions. We've had, as little as 3 or 4 and as old as folks in their 80s who all enjoy like sitting down and crafting together. And at the same time, the staff leading the program are talking about these cultural traditions. We also have a book club that's now in its fourth year. And our book club is a little different. We sometimes refer to it as a learning circle. We call it Land of the Sky 101, and we do it on a quarterly basis. We pair two different works together for these book clubs. So what we do is have like a thicker, denser academic style book. Sometimes they are a slog to get through. Other times they are a lot lighter. And we pair that with a lighter selection, like a novel, book of poetry, short stories, essays, and they always have something to do with one another. And I'll show some posters and talk about how those things go together and how we do that. But a librarian leads that discussion, and we follow up with an email with, oftentimes folks will say, "Oh, I listened to this podcast," or we'll have some additional books that folks might be interested in reading if they enjoyed the book club selections, and talk about some of the archival collections we have that apply as well. We try to be as interactive and intergenerational as possible. So those, previous things that I mentioned are definitely interactive, oftentimes intergenerational. But something we've done for the past few years as part of the summer reading program, along with our youth services team, is Retro Technology Discovery Day. This is so much fun. And we drag out all sorts of old technology and partner with some different organizations in our community to help flesh that out. Here locally, we have the Asheville Radio Museum that's housed at AB Tech Community College. So those folks will come out with some different examples of radios throughout the years. We get out our record players, our Victrola, our old record players, lots and lots of typewriters and cameras. And we do displays in the special collections room kind of showing this stuff off, and the history of photography and different things like that. And it's always a ton of fun. We have a nice little turnout. Then one room in the library, we've got an Atari set up. A Commodore 64 setup that's actually playable. And so they get to hang out, play video games, explore all these different types of technologies. And it's a lot of fun, but it'll make you feel really old. Um, because a lot of these kids have never even like seen a VHS tape, which, is completely understandable, but they're in awe of some of these things. A lot of them get really excited about dial-up internet sounds. They're like, "Oh my gosh, you had to wait on everything like this." And wait till you tell them that you couldn't be on the telephone at the same time as you're browsing the internet. And that just blows their minds. So we have a really good time with that. We also are really dedicated to our community archiving initiatives. This was something that was started at our library. Going back about 20 years or so. My predecessor got really interested in community archiving and collaborating with folks, our neighbors, to collect and share this type of information. And it's evolved over time. The oldest of our projects is the West Asheville History Project, and that was started in the mid 1990s. And so a lot of that stuff is photocopies of newspaper clippings, scans that we wish were better, but we can't go back and get anymore, and some oral histories. And that's progressed over the years. And we do that through our branches and collaborating with our branch libraries. So it helps narrow our geographic focus and also helps with staff capacity because those branch staff can assist in some of the admin stuff that goes along with these community archiving initiatives. For the last 5 years, we've also had an artist or curator in residence program. This got started in the middle of the pandemic. We were closed, and so we had the opportunity to kind of reevaluate our space, do a bunch of well-needed weeding, and kind of, transform who we are and what we do. And one of the things that we implemented was this artist in residence program. So this is all done through a space in our library called the Carolina Record Shop, record being a play on words. I see Clark here. Clark has donated several albums to our vinyl record collection, which is growing all the time. So those live over there for browsing. But we invite these artists to interact with our archives and to do installations that are really focused on the research that they did as part of their work. One of my favorites has been an artist named Eric William Carroll. And Eric went through and looked at every single scrapbook in our collection. So, like 100 and some odd scrapbooks, and did a big installation with various bits and pieces, talking about the things that he learned from those scrapbooks, and then had an activity to go along with it, which is called a screenshot scrapbook. So he kind of talked about the ways that we archive ourselves and how those have shifted and changed over time. And it was really interesting to see his final presentation talking about the decline of scrapbooking at the same time as the rise in social media. When you're able to very quickly share your images on the internet for folks to see, you're taking less time to print those things out and put them in a book and save them. And it's fun to talk to students about this because I think they don't necessarily realize that their Instagram accounts are, in one way or another, scrapbooks and could eventually become archival resources. So, with all of this variety of programming, including just our standard lecture and discussion, we get a wide variety of people out. This photograph is from a film screening that we had a few weeks ago with one of our Carolina record shop artists. They did a big installation about the Stumptown community in Asheville and showed off some of the oral histories that they've done over the years. And it all culminated in this awesome event where we had like 125 people come out to view this film. And we're still getting questions. Where can I watch it again? Where can I watch it again? So this was just a really fun day. And it's nice to see the library kind of come alive. When we're in the archives, we're often, seeing maybe 5 to 7 people a day. So when we have a big group of people show up, it really lights up the space. Folks get to talking about memories, looking at books on the shelf. And while I kind of hate to hear the phrase, I had no idea this was down here. I didn't know you existed. It also is inspiring to me because I'm like, okay, we've found another person to bring into the fold, perhaps, who now knows that this resource is available. Here's some examples of some programs that we've done over the past few years. I talked about Retro Technology Discovery Day. Here are some selections for our book club this year. And our last session was in March. And as an example of the two things that we kind of put together, sometimes those more academic books alongside something that's a lighter read, like a novel or poetry. Our last session was Cherokee Women by Theda Purdue, and we paired that with The Journey of August King by John Ely. While these are a little bit separate, they both follow women of color and how they're navigating spaces in, early 19th century, late 18th century United States. Coming up next is our big One Buncombe community read. So the selection for that this year was Happy Land by Dolan Perkins Valdez, which is about the Kingdom of the Happy Land, which was a free Black neighborhood built on formerly enslaved people in Henderson County near Zirconia. And we've paired that with Junaluska, which is a collection of oral histories done with the Junaluska community, a traditionally Black community up in Watauga County. So having those two books, folks can choose to read one or both, but then we have like a nice little conversation connecting those two things together. Back in March, we also had a Wikipedia event, which was really cool. The folks from the Wikimedia Foundation came down and talked to community members and taught them how to make Wikipedia edits. And we made a few new pages. We updated some things, added citations, and we had a bunch of people come out for that. We've done some movie screenings paired with books in the past as well. So for us here locally, Cold Mountain is an obvious choice. Another way we can reach patrons is through social media. And we do our best to kind of keep up with that. Um, through Facebook and Instagram are the primary platforms that we use. And even just doing those two platforms is a little bit overwhelming. But then we also have our Herd Tell blog. So that's attached to our website where we can write longer form content. But reaching folks through social media is one of the best ways to get their attention and get them excited about visiting the library for some of our programs. And then that's the gateway into using the archives on a pretty regular basis. So there are different platforms for different audiences. And really writing these posts for those two separate audiences is critical for them to gain traction and attention. So our Facebook audience leans a little bit older, and their interests are going to vary from the folks who we have on Instagram, which are generally between 25 and 45. Um, Blog posts are a really great way to get more in-depth information, and sometimes we'll, put up a social media post and it'll gain a lot of traction. There'll be a lot of conversation about it. And so we'll make the decision to say, we wrote like 300 words for this social media post. Let's take that and expand on it a little bit and put it on the blog and share it around and continue that conversation. It's also a fun way to share those moments that you have in the archives where you find something that you didn't know you had and you get really excited, or some kind of topical sorts of things like, perhaps the community's having a conversation about a particular point in time, like some planning and zoning type stuff, and it's an opportunity for us to go into the archives and show off some of the historical material that is relevant to that community conversation. I think it's really important for social media to not be afraid to get a little silly. Folks really respond to that kind of thing. In recent times, I know y'all probably remember the demure, cutesy trend that was going on there for a while. I just found some photographs by a particular photographer that took some rather demure images and put them together with that sound and got a lot of traction. Um, we got in on the "this is who you're asking to" trend, where we shared some photographs of staff as little ones. You can see me looking really, I don't know, sassy there. My mom taking a picture of me in the first grade for our wagon train event. Um, and so that helps folks, make you or feel like you are approachable. And I think that that's something that sometimes we can struggle with in archives is it feels like it's not approachable. It feels like it's not for you. But by kind of engaging in this social media kind of silly stuff, it makes folks think, oh, okay, well those ladies who work down there in the archives aren't, pent up with a tight bun on their head and glasses on their nose. They're not going to yell at me to shh. They might actually be interesting folks to talk to who I might want to build a relationship with. We find that trivia and nostalgia are always a big hit, especially on Facebook. We share a lot of our content to various local history enthusiast Facebook groups. We have one here called You Know You Grew Up in Asheville If, that has, like 15,000 group members. And so it's a really great way to reach a lot of people and to inspire conversations. Being that it's on social media, sometimes things get a little hairy, but most of the time people are really positive and receptive. You saw that poster for the Moonshine and Motorsports events that we did in September in 2024 back on the last slide, and I still have some of those social media posts that are floating around. I'll get notifications that people are continuing to comment on those. And every now and then we do use ads to boost programs when it makes sense. And usually the best time to do this is when things are getting a little bit of traction anyway, and when it's an event that you really hope is going to be super well attended. So it doesn't cost a whole lot of money, but it's kind of hit or miss as well. But I found that if something is already getting some eyeballs on it, this is a good opportunity to, throw $5 or $10 toward putting it in more people's feeds. And then, of course, there's regular old legacy media, the newspaper, and those types of folks. We have an email newsletter here locally called AVL Today that kind of operates in that news space. We've been able to build up some good relationships with the folks over at BPR, at Blue Ridge Public Radio, who are really awesome about sharing our upcoming programs or doing stories about things that we're working on at the time. Um, One of the main things to think about is working with your internal communications folks if you can. They already have all the press contacts. They're often able to draft press releases and things for you. So to kind of take that off your plate and get the information out there. If that's not something that's necessarily available to you, I really encourage you to take the time to kind of build a press resource list for sharing information and posting on event calendars. So thinking about those publications that are well read near you and making sure that you have the contact information for those folks so that when you do issue a press release, they're getting that. And something that has been really successful, I used to work at the Shenandoah Valley Museum out in Black Mountain, and the executive director there was in charge of writing a history or archives article in the local newspaper like once a month. And most of these are pretty short and sweet, 5 to 700 words. You put it together with a picture. And it's a really easy way to make sure that you're reaching a lot of different people. So next up is administration, those folks who make decisions about budgets and policies and things like that. So we'll talk a little bit about tracking your work, reporting that work, and then hollering about it, which I think is perhaps the most important piece of all of this. So even though it can feel like a little bit of a burden of like, I already have so much on my plate, do I really need to take the 10, 15 minutes out of my day to make a note of what I've done today? We found it to be really useful in advocating for ourselves. Folks in our administration, they're not librarians, they're not public historians. And so oftentimes they really just don't understand what it is that we do day to day. I know you all have probably heard someone say along the way, gosh, I'd love to be a librarian because I just get to sit around and read all day. When in fact, we probably have the longest TBR lists of anyone. Um, so tracking that work helps them better understand like what it is that we do and how much time we spend on various bits and pieces of our work. We do this through just a regular Excel spreadsheet with a few different categories. And I'll show you a little bit more about that here in a second. Um, and we kind of do it loosely. Like it's not an exact science. It's just kind of keeping up with what you're doing in some broad categories. Take pictures of what you're doing. Something that has come up for us is making sure that people understand how many individuals it can take to accomplish a particular task or how much space. So when you have a big collection that's incoming and you need to do appraisal and start weeding things, you got to spread out in most cases, and that can take 4 or 5 people to do efficiently. It can take 3 or 4 tables to make that happen, and it can take hours and hours and hours. And you all know this, but the folks who are making those decisions sometimes just don't. So documenting what it is you're doing throughout the day, especially when you're working on a big project or for us, in our case, it was saying, look how many people it takes to carry out a big, very fragile map and, get it photographed and all those good things. So really, visually showing people what goes into the work that we do. We also track patron feedback and statistics. Y'all are probably already keeping up with reference questions and door count and things like that. We also track circulation, even though our materials don't circulate. We just use the in-house circulation function. And then for our own purposes, so that we have an idea of what people are looking at, We export that all into a spreadsheet. So by the end of the year, we can see what is our number one most circulated materials? What are people really looking at all the time? And that can help us plan for the future. So at BCSC, we track door count and reference questions, book and archival collection circulation. So we keep up with what folks are looking at, what they're interested in, program participants. And because so many people increasingly are viewing our collections online, like they don't actually have to come in the door to get what they want or need, we also try to keep up with our website and catalog views. Our popular searches kind of helps us with planning programs moving forward. If everyone is, searching up George Massa, well, maybe we ought to do a George Massa program. Maybe there's a way that we can pull some of that stuff into our day-to-day work. Let's see. Our blog and social media views and interactions. This can just help us understand, who's looking at our stuff, what they're interested in, and then staff time. So on our staff time tracking spreadsheet that we keep up with, we track how much time we spend on the reference desk, how much time we spend doing reference off of the desk, um, programs and program planning, collections, admin, and then other, because sometimes things don't fit into a category. And that's also where we keep up with, like, I was on leave or I went to a conference or something like that, and keep just kind of loose notes to go along with it. And you can see our little pie charts here for image requests by what they were used for. The next step is to report it. And we do this with an annual review that we create every year. We've been doing this for about 5 years, and this is not only for administrators, it's for us as well. Sometimes you make it to the end of the year and you're like, what did I even accomplish? And if you took a little bit of time to like look back and think about it, it's like, wow, we actually did a whole lot this year and we made some improvements and we've set some new goals. And so this is an opportunity to really think about those things, to lay them all out for yourself and for administration. You can see a table of contents for one of our more recent, this is 2023 in review, and some of the categories and things that we talk about in here. So we like to do staff updates. This is a little section where you get to brag on yourself a little bit, keep up with, what types of professional development or professional service you've done throughout the year, your own personal goals and how you achieve those and things like that. We definitely love our challenges and opportunities section. This is where we, discuss, well, we could really use some more money for this. We could really use some more support for that. And in our case, it's like almost always asking for more staff. And being able to like serve our patrons appropriately, because our door count has grown a lot over the last few years, and our reference questions as well. So being able to keep up with interest is really important. All the statistics that I talked about previously and some of our goals. So we put in the previous year's goals and we talked about how we have achieved those or what progress we've made on those goals. And then we set new goals for the next year. Not all of these need to be, something that you put in a report. It doesn't have to be quarterly. It doesn't have to be annual. And it doesn't necessarily have to have, any kind of fancy formatting or anything like that. This is just a space where you can write down and document what it is that you're up to all of the time, so that when questions come up or opportunities for advocating for a particular need come up, you can point to this data. You can point to, your personal history and say, no, this is what we've been up to. Can you please help us support this a little bit more? And then holler about it. And I think that it's really, really important that you do this, that you stay in contact with folks, that you follow up on questions that you've had previously. Don't be afraid to be the squeaky wheel. And you know your administrators better than I do. I'm so thankful to have really awesome administrators who listen, who are interested in what we're doing. And part of the way that we've been able to get there is just by bugging people about it. Like, let me tell you how cool Special Collections is and why we need the support that we're asking for. It's also helpful to develop relationships throughout your organization to spread awareness of your department and your resources. Um, like this year, we're working together with Soil and Water to do some documenting of our local farmers. Soil and Water and Archives are strange bedfellows, but we have really enjoyed working together, not only to do this community archiving project with our local farmers, but also, a lot of these offices have years and years of stuff, like really cool stuff that are hiding out, in somebody's closet or desk. It wasn't that long ago that the Director of Health and Human Services brought us a box of really cool local public health bulletins from the early 1900s that had just been passed along from director to director to director. So, it's great for them to know what resources you have available to them, but then, vice versa, and building out a collection that way, especially within your institution. And then, if you decide to create a report, share it and refer back to it all the time. Um, Ours ends up being a little bit long because we want to talk about all the things that we've done. But really, sending that along all the way up the chain and, knowing that it got in front of people's faces is really important. And my number one tip is ask. The worst they can say is no. Something that I realized when I took over the supervisory position here at Buncombe County Special Collections was that a lot of what wasn't happening was because folks felt like they couldn't ask, that they had been kind of worn down over time, with perhaps making requests over the years and just being told no over and over and over again. But keeping those questions on folks' radars, keeping those requests on people's radars. Um, Maybe you've got kind of a wild idea that you'd like to pursue. Um, the worst they can say is no. Next up are our community partners. And some tips there are, putting yourself out there, engaging with the community, and then building meaningful relationships from there. And I'll say, I think maybe this is a hot take, but I think that effective community engagement is a little bit like running for Congress. Your campaign is to promote and advocate for your archive, and going out there and meeting people where they're at, building involved community members is a lot like what the folks who are running for office are doing. They're networking with influencers, right? They're saying, this is who I am, this is why you should care. And a lot of that is really just, boots on the ground kind of work. It's hard to make those connections when you're stuck in your office all day, and you're not necessarily attending community events or engaging with folks who are potential community partners. And then here's just the fun image of Teddy Roosevelt speaking on the campaign trail in Asheville. I just love this picture. So engage with community members. This is photograph here is from just last Saturday. This is two folks in the Leicester community who are chatting with one another. Bruce Nelson there on the right, and a fellow named Bert Abrams, well, flip that. Bert Abrams is on the right, and Bruce is on the left there. And we've just kicked off our Leicester Community History Project, and Bruce has taken up Bert as his oral history narrator. And so they've been meeting and discussing, and they were just enjoying a good time at our project kickoff party last weekend. But one of the things you can do is, go and attend programs that are hosted by other aligned organizations. And this doesn't necessarily have to mean other public history or archives or libraries groups. It can also mean various community groups that, might be interested in working alongside of you. This is a good way to identify organizations that might need assistance with archiving their own materials, and that's a really interesting gateway to partnership. And it's also just meeting various people who are engaged in the community. If folks are involved in these organizations, they're out there working together with community members and neighborhoods. Um, and are able to then say, I met this gal from the library the other day, and she told me about some interesting information she had about, something that relates to the work that we do. And then folks might start showing up. Um, Especially if you're new to an area, I think that it's a really great idea that, if you make some acquaintances at these events that you might attend, to schedule just social visits or kind of like low pressure informal brainstorming sessions. Like, go get coffee with somebody who works for the organization, and you all can just, discuss what the different types of work you do and how that intersects. And if nothing else, you've just made a new connection, you know, even if that doesn't turn into some sort of long-term partnership. This kind of goes back to our social media stuff, but the more you interact with other folks' material, the more that they'll interact with yours, and then that exponential growth starts to happen. So like and comment and share things that are relevant to your community. And lift up your colleagues and community org friends. If someone in your network is hosting a program, share it on your own social media pages. Put up a poster in the library and then try to go to that event yourself. And that's just showing people that you really care about the work that they do, and how, you might be able to work together in the future or just support each other through word of mouth. The next step of that is making those acquaintances like really meaningful relationships. So maybe you've gotten in good with somebody in an organization in your community, and this is an opportunity then to like sit down and identify some shared goals or other connections and find ways to collaborate if you can. Sometimes that could look like, hosting a program together. We're looking forward to having Asheville Greenworks come and present a program that goes along with our America 250 slate of things that are going to be happening later in the year. And one of the reasons we are doing that is because we hold the Greenworks archives, and they've been working together with us to, make continuous accruals and teaching them about how best to preserve the resources that they have. And they were founded in 1976 as a bicentennial project. So this is kind of bringing it full circle for Asheville Greenworks. Something to keep in mind is that capacity can ebb and flow a lot over time, but it's really important to stay in touch. You might just send that email that's like, I was thinking about you the other day when I read this particular book. Maybe we can check back in sometime soon, or attending the program to let them know, hey, I'm here and I'm paying attention to you and I care about the work that you're doing. Um, and then these relationships are, like I mentioned, Greenworks are particularly important if your archive is the custodian of materials for that organization. Um, And there's a really good webinar that Shrab put on not that long ago about MOUs and MOAs, memorandums of understanding or agreement. We like to do this with organizations that we hold materials for, to help with continuity, with clear guidelines and expectations. And this can help you as well as the organization when they're planning on how to archive their materials, and for when those items come in to already have a little bit of a sense of order. So some things we've included in there are naming conventions for digital files, types of materials that we don't want, like newspaper, for instance. And having that document really helps with organizations who um, have, I wouldn't call it high turnover in their organization, but who are voting new members in and out all the time. Another example of this beyond Greenworks for us is the Pen and Plate Club, which is kind of like a Toastmasters style organization here in Asheville. And our library has been collecting pen and plate clubs since their foundation back in like 1909. And we finally established a formal relationship with them through an MOU that talks about, how to deliver new accruals, what the naming convention should be. And so now, taking on new pen and plate club material is a breeze because the secretary of that organization is responsible for, you know, packaging everything up and sending it to us. So for us, it's really just a matter of popping it into the catalog really quickly, and we don't have to think too much about it while still getting like a nice amount of material from those folks on a pretty regular basis. And something to keep in mind with all of these different things is that Rome wasn't built in a day. There's no guarantee for immediate success. You might have to do a lot of trust building with organizations that may have had fractured relationships with the library in the past. So, an example for us in that is the Young Men's Institute, or the YMI Cultural Center, is a historically Black organization who our library has made attempts to work with in the past, but maybe those instances didn't work out very well, and there was, a little bit of tension there. And so just continuing to show up, to talk to people, to let them know that you're there as a resource and a facilitator rather than somebody coming to gobble up their treasures, is a really important thing to do as well. And just keep in mind that sometimes you're really going to have to do a lot of work to rebuild trust. And that a lot of that work is sort of built around, what I was saying a few minutes ago about having these social visits, attending programs without an agenda, showing up and letting folks know that you care about the work that they're doing. And that's it for me. Those are some hot tips and tricks, some of the things that we do to advocate for our archives. And I hope that, you may be able to pick a few things out of there that might help your work, and with reaching your own patrons and community members.
All right, thank you so much, Catherine. That was a lot of amazing information and super useful. I already have some ideas, definitely, especially around the creative programming. That's really cool. I'll go ahead and open the floor for questions, so feel free to put those in the chat or just unmute yourself if you have any. We got one question. Can you send the slides to us? Are you okay with sharing the slides, Catherine?
Yeah, that's fine. And I'll also send you a copy of our annual review from last year, just so folks have like a nice example of how we put things together.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah, I will share those out after the recording is done, and then also the recording from today will also be available on the association's YouTube channel for anyone who wants to come back and view it again. All right. How often do you contact your connections to maintain relationships?
It kind of depends on the relationship, and that's one of the reasons for really building a personal relationship with somebody, is that over time you get an understanding of what their capacity is and what they've got going on. So I'll use the YMI again as an example. I know not to worry about what's going on over there in August and September because they are planning for the Goombay Festival. So if I sent somebody a note in late July and I haven't heard back from them, I'm just going to wait until Goombay is over and give people a couple weeks to rest and recover from that giant festival and then get back with them. If I asked, a specific question and it feels time sensitive, sometimes I'll just make a note to myself, in my to-do list that's like, hey, check back with the Greenworks people, in 2 weeks or so. Um, just to, make sure that we're still on the same page or something like that. So it kind of depends, but in most instances, I give people like 2 to 3 weeks before I send another little like poke email that's like, hey, just checking in on you. Um, let's chat sometime. Um, and if there's an organization that you're not, actively working with all the time, sometimes it can just be nice to send a little note. Maybe you came across something in the collection that is related to their organization in some way. Take a quick little picture, put it in an email, and say, hey, thought about you today. Hope everything's going well with planning for Goombay or whatever. So staying in touch in the same way that you might stay in touch with your friends.
Well, I kind of had a question about social media engagement. So how, like, from when you started to now, how has the social media engagement built and like, does it take time to see that kind of return for doing different trends? Like, how long do you do a trend before you maybe switch to something else or something like that?
The first thing I'll say about that is that social media is a lot more labor intensive than it seems like it's going to be, especially if you want to do something that's like on trend or whatever. And I do that very rarely for that reason. But I'd say that it does have to kind of slowly build up over time. I'm not a social media expert by any stretch of the imagination. I would be interested to know if there is some like science out there about where the tipping point is for, followers versus engagement and things like that. So it's really not an exact science. We just anecdotally and using like Meta Business Suite are able to see like what people are actually engaging with and say, okay, well, we'll do more of that. Um, because I mentioned the NASCAR posts. You post about moonshine and motorsports from Buncombe County Special Collections, and it's just going to go on forever. People love to talk about moonshine and motorsports. People love to talk about restaurants that were around when they were young, gathering places. Another one that takes off all the time is if we share something about, you know, um, what's that place called? Buck's Drive-In, which was a spot on Tunnel Road, and people will just go on and talk and talk and talk and reminisce about spending time there after school or after football games. Um, so, yeah, I'm not really sure where the tipping point is or what the big feedback can be, but it's a nice opportunity to get a little bit of insight into what folks in your broader community are really interested in. So it's a little bit like, throwing the spaghetti noodle at the wall and seeing when it sticks.
Have you seen an increase in attendance in programming when you see things kind of take off on social media?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, for sure. Um, I'll never get over this. This might be um, something that I think about forever, and I'd love to find a way to put this program on at some point. Um, September 2024 is when we were doing all of our moonshine and motorsports stuff. We had the big moonshine and motorsports exhibit from the state that we supplemented with our own materials. We did several different programs, but it was all going to culminate in this gathering to celebrate the um, was it the 20th, 25th anniversary of the final race at Asheville Motor Speedway. And we kind of built up to that throughout the month and started advertising it. We did boost that post on social media a little bit. And we were coming up on a week before this program, and I had like 500 people who said they were going to show up to this thing. Now, I know that not all 500 of those people were going to show up, but I thought, you know what? If you take like 20-30% off the top, this is going to be a really big, well-attended program. We were going to have it at the picnic shelter at Carrier Park, where the racetrack is, but Helene completely changed those plans. So that was a really good example of taking that something that I know folks are really interested in, building up to a bigger event over time, and then putting, like $10 toward advertising, and that turned into this thing where it was like, oh gosh, are we going to have too many people at this event? Is it going to be way too big? So that's an example I have of, that kind of working out that way. And then similarly with the Stumptown documentary screening that I showed an image of, that was really kind of a group social media effort too, which brings us back to our community connections. So knowing that our artist in residence, who has a pretty good social media presence, was doing it and sharing it. A local restaurant catered. They're called Sisters on Montford, and they've gotten a lot of good attention recently, so they're sharing things. So working together, not only on like programming, but also strategizing to support that programming, is really effective as well. We have an opportunity for folks to do a post-program survey. Um, we haven't had a lot of luck with contributions to that, but it does ask, where did you hear about this program? But it's not used enough for it to really be a good gauge of who's doing what and where they came from and all that.
Oh, thanks. All right. Any other questions?
And if folks think of things later on, just feel free to shoot me an email and I'll be happy to chat with you about it.
All right, so I'll go ahead and say we'll wrap up now. Thank you once again, Catherine, for joining us today and sharing all that amazing information. I hope everyone walks away today with some cool ideas for how to engage with different communities around their archive and their library. Um, and like I said, the video will be posted if you guys want to reference it again, and that'll be available on the association's YouTube channel. So hope everyone has a great rest of your day. Thanks for coming.
Thanks, everyone.